viewers and listeners. My name's Sean Hewitt, and but the captain of the ship is very much Sid Smith, Deadhead, Breadhead, and Bobcat, and he is leading us through a meandering journey, an epic odyssey through Dylan Vinyl, the definitive collection. This is Idiot Wind, episode 28. We are racing through the catalogue, as you can tell. And, even though Sid is only 22, he's suffering a bit from listening to all these records. And this week we're dealing with quite a major record, I think. I think I might be alone in that in this session. But here we go. It's a quite striking cover, actually. Bob Dylan, Oh Mercy. Do you see that? It's quite a nice cover. Got a picture of Bob on the back, taken by Susie Q. Photographed by Susie Q. And it's quite an attractive design inside. You see that? That's really good, isn't it? It's a series of scrawled white lines over a black background. And on the other side, it's just the credits for each song, the instrumental credits for each song. And of course, we're in the wonderful series, Dylan Vinyl, the definitive collection. So there is a rather remarkable magazine that comes with this as well. And here it is. This is issue 28, as I said. And I thought, what picture will they choose? Well, they choose the picture off the back of the album. It's a really great bit of picture research there, seeing as that was probably taken years before this album was made. I thought, well done. Nothing about the picture on there. And the usual encyclopedic account of the making of the album inside there. I think we can dismiss that now. That's it. This album is unusual in many ways, and one is during the making of this album, Bob already had two other albums in the American top 10, one of which was incredibly the album we did last time, Dylan and the Dead. That was in the top 10 of the album charts. The other project he was involved with at this time was, of course, the Travelling Wilburys. Oh, and here they are. They look old stages there. They're all in the mid-40s, aren't they? It's Bob Dylan, it's Jeff Lynne, it's Tom Petty, it's Roy Orbison, and it's George Harrison. They made an album, Travelling Wilburys Volume 1, and that was a hit. And Bob was started off as an attempt to record a B-side in George Harrison's garage. And they just congregated there and made this record that the record company liked more than anything on George's LP. So they stuck around and they played some stuff. I mean, and it was surprisingly popular. I mean, it's quite a nice album. And Bob, there's quite a lot of Bob-like touches. George Harrison apparently wandering around the garden saying, "Come on then, great lyricist. Give us some of your lyrics then." And George, a slavish fanboy of Bob. They all look picture of them at the table in the house, and they're all writing songs together. Jeff Lynne, and this is quite interesting as well in that on that first song they recorded, the drummer who used to be in Bob's band, Ian Wallace, he plays tom-toms on that track. So most of the drums are played by Jim Keltner on all the Travelling Wilburys tracks. They made another album. This was released in '88. They made another album in 1990, but Roy Orbison had died by that stage, that second album was called Volume 3. So one of those musicians' jokes we all love so much. Meanwhile, as for Oh Mercy itself, Bob was at a bit of a low point, I think. He'd hurt his hand, as I said last time. It took ages to recover. He devised a new way of playing chords, which he explains at some length, and I've never understood. It's all about odd and even numbers. It's all about ignoring the pentatonic scale. He goes into quite some detail, and I'm not going to read it out because I'm not sure if it makes any sense. But it obviously was a way he found to find a new way into his own songs. And his shows around this time began to get much better reviews. He played in smaller venues. He had his own band. There were no star guests. And he just wanted to start from the ground up. And one of the unusual things about this record is that we have a series of accounts of it in book form of its making. One, of course, is by the producer. It's a Soul Mining, A Musical Life by Daniel Lanois. Then there's the engineer. He's Listen Up. He goes into some detail about both this album and the later album, Time Out of Mind, which was also recorded with Daniel Lanois. And then there's this geezer who reckons he was there as well. Devotes an entire chapter of this book to 80 pages to the making of Oh Mercy, which was an important part of it. Of all the albums he's made, the only 2 albums with dedicated chapters in that book are bizarrely New Morning and Oh Mercy. And why he chose those 2, nobody knows. But they do come at particular points in his life where he's at a crossroads, I think, those 2 albums. The other version is, of course, he'd written notes for all his albums and just picked those 2 at the last minute. He has actually written, apparently, an essay for every album. But this is a fascinating account because it's an album I know very well. I've known this album since the day it came out. And I remember Daniel Lanois appearing on the radio talking about it before I even knew he was producing it and playing a song called Man in the Long Black Coat. While he's making shows with Tom Petty before he does this and the Dead tour, Dylan is thinking of retiring. He's seriously thinking about it. And then he sees this jazz band. He decides to change his way of performing. He changes his way of playing the guitar. And he says this: I saw that instead of being stranded somewhere at the end of the story, I was actually in the prelude to the beginning of another one. I could put my decision to retire on hold. It might be interesting to start up again, put myself in the service of the public. I also knew that it would take years to perfect and refine this idiom, but because of my fame and reputation, the opportunity would be there. After the tour with Tom Petty, I was sitting in London at the St. James's Club with Elliot Roberts, who had engineered both the Petty shows and the Dead shows. I told him I needed to work 200 show dates the next year. Elliot was pragmatic and said that I should take a couple of years off and then come back. The picture is perfect like it is, he said. Let it be. No, I said, it's not perfect and I have to correct it. He then persuades Elliot Roberts to let him do it. My fame was immense, could fill a football stadium, but it was like having some weird diploma that won't get you into any college, he says. Promoters didn't want to touch me either. They'd been burned too often in the past, and the anger hadn't gone out of them. I'm all for you, they might say, but I can't do it. In reality, I was just above a club act, could hardly fill small theatres. There weren't any alchemic shortcuts. Critics could dismiss me easily too, so I wouldn't be able to depend on them to tell my tale. Most music journalists have become nothing more than public relations staff anyway. I would have to rely on word of mouth. I'd rely on that like my life depended on it. Word of mouth spreads like wildfire, doesn't take no for an answer. I wished I was at least 20 years younger. Wished that I had just dropped on the scene all over again. But what could you do? So he is deeply worried about where he's been and what he's been doing, and he wants to shake things up. The singer Bono of U2 is one of several friends. He comes down to his house for dinner, brings a case of Guinness with him, and he says in another life, he could have been if he'd have come to America earlier, Bono could have been a cop. That's what he says. He could persuade you into anything. And they talk about the beginnings of America. They talk about Roman Polanski and the Vikings, this conversation. They have this huge conversation. And at the end of it, Bono wants to see some lyrics. Dylan shows him some lyrics he's recently written. He's not sure if they're any good. Bono then rings Daniel Lanois and puts him on the phone to Dylan. So that is in his own house. Dylan talks to Lanois. Lanois says he's in New Orleans for the time being, and if you ask to court him, you have to ring him or visit him there, and he'd like to talk about it, and he does, and he goes into a very detailed and interesting description of the sometimes fraught process of working with Daniel Lenoir. At one point, Lenoir smashes a dobro in front of everyone, and Bob really can't work out why, and a woman who's there notating the tracking of recording the songs they're recording bursts into tears, and Bob remembers feeling very sorry for her, having to witness all this. But he does like Lenoir's commitment, and he does like the seriousness to which he takes the recording sessions. A lot of the recordings are done, basic tracks are done with him and Bob sitting facing each other in this thrown together studio in a house in New Orleans, in what is basically the kitchen. So they're basically, and sometimes other musicians play with them, sometimes they overdub them. This is a way that Bob is a bit unsure about. He usually likes the band in the room and while he's playing, and Lenoir shows him all kinds of things, and he's interested by what he calls Lenoir's ambience. He likes that sound of that. Malcolm Byrne is another engineer, Mark Howard. They put a lot of work into the sound of this record, and Dylan is very impressed by their commitment to a coherent sound. Like many of Bob's interesting albums, this is a song with no star guests. This is an album with no star guests, just a small core of musicians that are on most of the tracks, and I think that benefits any album he does that on. And the one difference to that really is the second track, where Teardrops Fall, where it's Rockin' Dopsy and his band play on that, and Bob was quite interested in playing with them, but they did a few tracks with them apparently, but then they realized if a song wasn't in the key of D or G, according to Lanny Lenoir, they couldn't play it. And Bob likes to play around with the keys of the song, so you get various versions of songs in different keys, but if it wasn't in D or G, Rockin' Dopsy's band couldn't follow him. So even though he liked the sound of them, and they sound like he wanted them to sound on that track with Lenoir on steel guitar, they were quickly dropped. They'd rather have the people who could play in more than two keys in the studio with them. And on they went. At one point there was a moment, there was 3 pianos in the house set up for recording. Lenoir and Howard noticed Dylan always went to one, and he always plays that piano. Why is that? And eventually they asked him, why do you always pick that piano? Is it the attack? Is it the sound? He says, it's the only one you've put a stool next to. The bass player, I always forget these people's names because, as I say, I have generally abhor the albums with it. Yes, it was Tony Hall is the bass player on this. He's playing on a lot of the New York sessions with Lenoir in this period, and he's down there about 2 days, and he eventually asked Mark Howard, when's Bob Dylan coming? I was looking forward to meeting him, and are we going to be here when he's recording? And at that point, Mark Howard pointed out that the bloke sitting next to him scribbling lyrics was in fact Bob Dylan, and Bob just turned around and raised his eyebrow and smiled, and then just went back to his notebooks. And
what a great story!
He hadn't said a word. He hadn't said a word to the musicians, and he was just trying to work out what he was going to sing at that point. And this guy, they were trying out various sounds. They were doing run-throughs of various songs that Bob had showed them, but they were just settling in really for the first day or two. And he said, well, is Bob Dylan gonna actually come?
Yeah.
And he said, you've been sitting next to him all morning. Bob was keeping himself to himself. He was probably wearing his little hood thing. He was just writing away, and just turned around, raised his eyebrow and smiled. Yeah. As he says in that, there's a song on this album called What Was It You Wanted, which is about public attention. It's about what people expect of you. And he said some soft and weak people are the most aggressive and won't take no for an answer. You just have to smile and put your sunglasses on. And I think he was basically smiling and put his sunglasses on in the early part of this. New setup for him, never recorded in a house like this, never worked with this producer, was putting his hands in his album in the hands of this guy who'd been recommended at a dinner party by Bono. So it was all new for him. And the album itself was pretty highly acclaimed. It's got a coherent sound. It's very atmospheric album. The lyrics are often quite simple, actually. I mean, this is not one of his great lyrical albums. Political World, which starts it, is just a nice feeling groove. And the words are just, neither here nor there, I think, on that record. It's just setting the mood for the album. Where Teardrops Fall is a total change from anything else on the album. It's the Rockin' Dopsy song, and it's a simple song. It's very good. Where the album really starts for me is Everything Is Broken. I think Everything Is Broken is a lovely track. Lenoir thought this was a throwaway. Bob didn't. Originally, the lyrics were far more extensive. Bob cut most of the verses out for this version, and he wanted this feel. He thinks Lenoir got a great feel on it. One thing I think nowadays about Everything Is Broken is it really isn't a candidate for the national anthem of the United Kingdom, because we live in a country where everything is broken, and no one seems to, and the people in charge seem to be, well, quite happy with that state of affairs. And I always think of the state of Britain when I hear this song. Ring Them Bells. I didn't like Ring Them Bells when I first heard this album in 1989 when I bought it. A weird thing happened. I know you're always saying, Sid, that you often prefer the songs sung by other people. And this is a very unusual tale and a very unlikely person. But I was visiting my parents back in 1990, 89, somewhere around there. And they just, in between two programs, there's one of those Sunday afternoon religious shows, vague, insipid BBC or ITV, I don't know, probably BBC. And Barbara Dixon was introducing it, and she was a big singer at the time and got quite a nice voice. And suddenly she sang Ring Them Bells, which it totally took me by surprise. I thought, what the fuck? This is off Oh Mercy, And when she sang it, when someone else sang it, I realised actually this is a decent song. And a lot of Bob's versions live are better than this. I quite like Ring Them Bells. Now, the two best songs, I think, are the track that's on the end of the old side one and the track that's on the beginning of the old side two. Well, current. Man in the Long Black Coat is a very atmospheric song. I've wondered for years who the Man in the Long Black Coat was. Man in the Long Black Coat could be anyone. It could be Dylan. But the real subject of this song is the town he visits. It's a town cut off from the outside world. It's not bothered about what's happening in the modern world. And he comes and a bored woman goes with him. And for that reason, she's demonized by the people left. And this is the song of them being demonizing her. There was dust on the man in the long black coat. He's regarded as demonic just for being from the outside world. And this is a thing about the middle of America where people are stuck in past views of the world that Bob returns to much later in his career. Most of the time is a lovely love song, beautifully arranged by Lenoir. There are several versions of this. On the later bootleg series, Volume 8, Telltale Signs, there's quite a lot of songs from these sessions. And most of the time starts off with Bob just singing it with acoustic guitar. And gradually you hear other versions develop, and halfway through one of them, that bass, that Walk on the Wild Side type bass line appears, which is Lenoir, I think, originally played that. And he adds this lovely treated guitar ambience to it. It's kind of a modern day If You See Her Say Hello. It's probably about an earlier person in Bob's life, shall we say, without naming her. And it's most of the time he's all right, but often he isn't. And it's that simple idea that's, I think, beautifully expressed in the song. What good am I? Then we get a series, the album then becomes a lot more introspective and contemplative. What good am I? There we go. That's one of the first songs he wrote for this album. And I think it reflects the mood he was about his career and his own person when at the start of this writing period. What good am I? It's all in the title. The one song I don't really like on this record is Disease of Conceit. It's okay, but it's a bit laboured. And there are other songs recorded during these sessions that tower over it, that of course aren't on. So Disease of Conceit is obvious and laboured and hectoring and preachy, and I just don't like it. What Was It You Wanted, I do like. A year or two ago when he did Shadow Kingdom, is the early songs of Bob Dylan, that was called. The only song he did after the 70s, I think, really, was What Was It You Wanted, suddenly appeared in the middle of there. And I think it's a glimpse of a more personal point of view than you usually get, than the invented personas and invented halls of mirrors you get in a Bob Dylan song. It's I do like the joke as well. I'll be back in a minute, and then the next verse. What was it? It's okay now. I'm back. I thought that was lovely. And then Shooting Star, another song that took a long time to grow on. What are you doing, Sid?
Sorry,
you're adding Lenoir-esque ambience to my conversation.
sorry, the computer went mad there. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, of course, you're playing the role of Brian Eno now in this. And one thing is, Brian Eno is a shadow presence on this. If you listen to Man in the Long Black Coat, I forgot to mention this, there's the sound of some crickets, which Malcolm Byrne added, because the keyboard Malcolm Byrne used on a lot of this record was Brian Eno's DX7 keyboard, which Eno had left with Lenoir. And on that, he got a lot of his little found sounds and samples, and one was his cricket sound, which is used quite a lot. So because he says about crickets in the opening line, Malcolm Byrne says to Daniel, "Shall I put some crickets on and see if you go for it?" Because we've got Brian's cricket sound here. So just put it on, see what he says, you know. So they did that, and Bob liked it. He liked the cricket sound. So Brian Eno contributed in a ghost fashion to this. Anyway, Shooting Star, the final song. For years, I didn't like it very much. I think it was a bit. This is the thing about these records; they reveal depths over years. That's one point I keep meaning to make. And if an album we're going to come to in a few episodes' time is very strong on that. An album I've lived with for many years. But over the years, I've really appreciated it more and more with each passing year. I think it's actually a very strong song, and it's a lovely, slightly uplifting after the kind of introspection and downbeat feel of some of the lyrics. It's a more hopeful end to the song, and he's looking outward towards the world of relationships, and indeed engaging with the world a bit more, like he is doing in his live shows with his never-ending tour in this period. Overall, this album was very warmly reviewed. I don't think it was a massive seller. Dylan says in the book, anyone who puts a record out is going to get at least one good review. That doesn't mean anyone's going to buy it. And that's a comment he makes in passing. So I take it, after going through all his rows with Lenoir, he was suspecting a bit more of it. There were several songs missed off this. One was called Dignity, which was released as a single afterwards. That's a great song, Dignity. He mentions the Duke of Edinburgh. For some reason, he mentions the Duke of Edinburgh, who was a bit worried about dignity in Bob's weird view of the world. The song that was most regretted that Lenoir wanted to open this album was a song called Series of Dreams. And Series of Dreams is a remarkable track. We've heard a few versions of it in the years since this. And you just think, why did you leave that off? That's a great song. And not only is it lyrically very vivid, it's musically quite dramatic as well. And I think he's talking about how he writes songs. I was thinking about a series of dreams, he says, and songs about dreams. This becomes important in the later career of Bob Dylan as well, how he gets a lot of ideas in dreams. But I think he maybe thought he was giving too much away with the lyrics of Series of Dreams, you know. It's a very interesting lyric in the way of late Dylan lyrics, and that it uses very simple language, but actually those simple words have hidden depths beneath them. Anyway, Lenoir pushed and pushed and pushed for that to be on the record, and Dylan said no. So it appeared on other collections later on. Anyway, I think after Knocked Out, Loaded, and Down in the Groove, and Dylan and the Dead, I think this is a chink of light, this album. What did you think of it?
first time hearing it for me this week. I think the most obvious point to make, obviously, is the overall which you've referenced already, is the overall cohesion of the sound.
Yes.
And it's nice to hear that actually with a Bob Dylan album, because they're often sort of very slipshod and kind of cursory albums from a production point of view, or from a performance point of view in many cases. But not so with this one, and I quite liked that. I responded well to that environment, if you like. So it certainly makes listening to some of the material a bit easier. That said, I was gratified to come across The Man in the Long Black Coat, because of course that was covered by Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Was it?
Yeah, on their album In the Hot Seat.
How long does it last when they cover it?
Oh, about 6 months. So by the time you get the drum solo in there, no, there isn't a drum solo, obviously. I'm not even sure Carl Palmer even plays on that track, to be honest, because it sounds just like one of those drum machine things that were very, very in vogue at the time, with like little bits of percussion added in. I mean, I'm sure Carl Palmer probably played it all, but anyway. So yeah, did any of it kind of land with me? I mean, I said before in one of our previous chats, I would never willingly listen to, I think it was Dylan and the Dead. I think I said I would never willingly listen to it again. I would probably be okay if I encountered Oh Mercy again. Although that said, you know, there's not much of it in it for me. Bear in mind, I don't really give a toss about the lyrics. And, you know, if it's got a decent tune or a nice chord sequence, that'll do it. But you don't get many decent tunes with Bob Dylan. It's just the nature of the thing. It's how, and I accept that. That said, there was one or two moments on the album. I mean, on the downside, I mean, Political World, it was all right. Ring Them Bells, Ring Them Bells sort of reminded me of early Dylan. It sort of it did. It reminded me of sort of the motif of ring the bells for X, ring X, ring the bells for Y.
I get what you mean, yeah.
So it had that. I mean, I could see that going down very well in 1964. Yeah, it would have been one of those great songs, you know, about that summed up the world. Interestingly, there's a line in it. I haven't got a note of this. I'm just doing it from memory. There was a line in it when I just thought, "Oh, fuck off." Ring the bells for the chosen few, I think it says. And so he's back on that sort of kick about, you know, kind of, you know, never mind all you heathens, you know, let's just ring the bells for us in the gang, you know. And I just thought, oh, fuck off. And that sort of kind of got in the way a little bit. As I say, Man in the Long Black Coat. I mean, I laughed out loud when I noticed it was on the album, because I thought, because I had to there was some article I'd written in relatively recent years where on Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I had to reference it, you know. So there it was, and I'd never heard the Bob Dylan version ever.
Well, you've heard the Emerson, Lake and Palmer version.
So I mean, I've got to say, you know, I mean, the Emerson, Lake and Palmer version isn't something that I would necessarily be that happy about listening to many more times than I've already had to for professional purposes. Yes. But it was funny, you know, just coming to that song like kind of brand new, and here's the Bob Dylan version for the first time. Disease of Conceit. No, thank you. Again, it's that sort of preachy side of it, which kind of
I don't
sticks
think
in
conceit
me
works
craw.
at all.
The one track I would definitely pick from this album, I would say I was charmed by it, and that's Shooting Star. I thought
Really?
Shooting
That's
Star
very
was a
interesting.
lovely song. I thought it was a lovely song. I just thought, again, I mean, as I say, I don't care how lyrically clever Bob Dylan. In fact, the more lyrically clever Bob Dylan is, the less likely I am to want to kind of listen to it. Because frankly, I think that received opinion is largely tosh. And what I liked about Shooting Star was just it's a nice simple picture. Sometimes when you've got, like, in a very expressive painter, sometimes when they just reduce the palette down into something that's very focused, very sweet, and I think when I listen to Shooting Star, I mean, I don't know anything about the making of it, but it seemed to me that was something that was shaped by the environment that he was working in, i.e. working with an external producer. I don't know to what extent Daniel Lanois had anything to do with how that song kind of comes out, but it stood out for me. I listened to this album a couple of times the other day, and that one stood out, like, consistently. It's probably not a great Bob Dylan song, but none of them are. But it's a nice simple song, and I think it's good. Dylan writes good simple songs, I think, and that one was a nice one. Yeah. So my overall verdict on this was, I kind of struggled with it a little bit at first, but with the actual content, didn't struggle with the sound. It sounded okay. It sounded good. Daniel Lanois, you know what you get with Daniel Lanois, and I'm generally all right with it. I'm generally on board, and I thought it worked quite well. That those two worlds, if you like. So yeah, not what's the next album we're going to be doing?
Well, is that your favourite track, then, Shooting Star?
Yeah.
I think mine is most of the time.
Right. Okay, that's at the start of that run. Yeah, good. Yeah. What's the next album we're doing?
The next album is Under the Red Sky.